boy, we have had a major shakeup in the Magic the Gathering community, so I guess it's probably time to go ahead and talk about that a little bit, and let's see if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Those who might not be aware, this is what happened recently. This guy right here. So this is, well, the Wizards of the Coast basically telling us what needs to happen in Magic the Gathering's standard format. It's called Aligning the Universes, making all our sets legal in all our formats. Now, before I get into this, let me go ahead and explain our current situation. It's been the case for the longest time that there's multiple tiers of Magic the Gathering. There's Legacy tier, where Commander and Legacy and pretty much all the Eternal formats sit. And then, after that, you have your Modern tier of format. Everything from 2006 onward, from Mirrodin block all the way until the present day, including the sets that existed as Horizon sets, Modern Horizons 1, 2, and 3. And then after that, you have the Pioneer format, the Pioneer tier of Magic, which is 2012 onward, from Ravnica, or the newer version of Ravnica, all the way until now. And then there's Standard, which had been the previous 2 years of sets, but now is the previous 3 years of sets on a rotating format instead of an Eternal format. With one exception, we're also getting Magic the Gathering Foundations, which is supposed to be kind of sort of the same thing as the core set in Hearthstone, where you have one base set that everything is able to build off of. This is what we used to have in Magic for the longest time in the core sets, but core sets ended up getting discontinued after a while due to a variety of reasons. They didn't sell as well as other sets, as well as other internal Wizards of the Coast reasons that I am not privy to, but I can only guess at. The Foundation set seems to be a way to get us back to that core set ethos, where every single set does not have to carry the weight of all of the mechanics of Magic the Gathering. Instead, sets are allowed to focus on their core mechanics and have a good time as a result. And then the core set can handle the more baseline Magic the Gathering shenanigans. As an example, there's cards like Llanowar Elf and Lightning Bolt that are very core to the identity of Magic the Gathering, but we can't print a Lightning Bolt or a Llanowar Elf in every single core or in every single set of Magic. But Foundations allows us to put cards like Llanowar Elf, Lightning Bolt, etc. in a set, so players like you and me can play with them going forward. It's not saying we actually have access to Lightning Bolt, that's just kind of explaining the reason the set exists. And since the set is a 5-year set instead of a 3-year set, like everything else in Standard, it gives you that baseline that people can buy into and hold onto their cards and feel like they're going to maintain their value, instead of rotating out one day and being less valuable for them, at least for a longer period of time. Insert the second issue here. Aligning the universes, making all our sets legal in all our formats. So previously, we only had one Universes Beyond set that made its way into Standard rotation, and thus into Pioneer, and that was Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. But it was a very underpowered set compared to what was around at the time, and despite the fact that I loved it because I loved the dungeon mechanic, it was not a very well-liked set by general Magic players, and the consensus was not to let Universes Beyond end up becoming a thing in Standard. There was a conversation about the Lord of the Rings set being in Standard, and then eventually that got moved into Modern only, and this created another problem. Modern got cards like Orcish Bowmasters, and when it got stuff like that, despite the fact that most of the Lord of the Rings set was perfectly, reasonably powered for what would be considered Modern at the time, it didn't matter because cards like the One Ring and Orcish Bowmasters ended up being so overtly powerful that they became obvious run-ins in any deck that could fit them. This created another issue. If Modern is already the home for the powerful cards, and these cards are so powerful that they overpower Modern staples, then what the hell is Wizards of the Coast doing? And so, players who already were trepidatious about Universes Beyond product making it into Standard rotation originally now had even more reason to be worried, because Modern had been basically fucked up by this set. And due to the way that licensing agreements work in Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering, sometimes it's hard to tell how long we're going to be allowed to have certain sets printed for. Wizards may have to renew the license to an IP in order to maintain access to those cards for players. And the actual ability for Wizards to make the universes within versions of cards, say something like Greymond Avacyn Stalwart, who is a universes within retrain of Rick Steadfast, leader from The Walking Dead, it's hard to be really on the same page as Wizards here, because we've already lived in the world where sometimes we get the cards we need from Universes Beyond really quickly, like with the Stranger's Thing collaboration, and other times we get them like 3 years later, like with the Walking Dead collaboration, and we still haven't seen universes within versions of a lot of the Warhammer cards that will slowly become staples in the colors that they are built for. And it's very, very hard to have faith in Wizards of the Coast when it comes to this kind of stuff, because we want to have access to these cards for the longest time possible, and we don't have access to the actual agreements that Wizards has with different IPs that tell us how long we're going to be able to have those IPs in Magic the Gathering in print runs. So you can see a lot of the concern that players have had about Universes Beyond. There's also the more esoteric concern from players about how much this affects the identity of Magic the Gathering. The fact that we have main characters like Avacyn and Sorin and Chandra, who are mainstays, or, dead, but are mainstays of the Magic the Gathering story. And when we're trying to mix those with all these other Universes Beyond characters like Captain America and Rick from The Walking Dead, you eventually get to the point where you feel like you're just playing Fortnite, the card game. But that brings me to the actual point of this video. I think Universes Beyond in Standard is a good thing. Now, we're going to read Wizards of the Coast's reasonings real quick, but I wanted to give all of that preamble and kind of show my hand a little bit first before we get into this. Now, I know that Wizards has said previously that Universes Beyond would not be in Standard, but remember, these are conversations that are constantly being had in back rooms by a corporation. We are not privy to everything that goes on in those conversations. So yes, it is contradictory. I'll get that out of the way. It is contradictory that we have to deal with the Universes Beyond stuff coming into Standard, which is a betrayal of trust to the players from Wizards. I get that. However, let's read what they have to say, and then I'll make my points a little more broad and a little more understandable. So, with this look at 2025, they showed that, we're going to be going back to Tarkir. We're going to go to the Edge of Eternities, whatever that means. Probably an Eldrazi-style set at that point. And a to-be-announced set called Oob, which definitely is another Dragon Ball Z collab. Then we have the Universes Beyond sets. We have Final Fantasy, we have Spider-Man. We've got Universes Beyond stuff on the horizon as we go. Now, this creates a bit of a problem for players, because in our previous setup, these would have all been direct-to-modern sets, and this would mean that Standard was the only place you could play, quote, real Magic, and Pioneer as well by extension, and Modern is where all of the wacky, zany shit was going. And because Modern has such a higher power ceiling than the other formats do, to make sure that these sets sell, they need to be released into the Modern environment with modern power level stuff like Orcish Bowmasters and the One Ring. And then those cards end up bleeding their way into Commander and power creeping Commander even further. And if you believe for a second that Commander doesn't experience power creep or feature creep, then you would be wrong and you need to play more Commander. Anyway, so Aaron Forsyth begins saying, yikes, you may be thinking that's so many direct-to-modern sets, and you would be correct if that's what we were doing. To avoid that problem, as well as solve a couple of others, we are changing how we design Universes Beyond sets, making them appropriate for all our major constructed formats. So, Just so you know, the power level of a set that introduces itself into Standard is generally lower than the power level of something like, say, Modern Horizons or even a Commander-centric set. So this means that the power level of these sets will actually be lower than what we are used to experiencing from Universes Beyond. Again, when we got Universes Beyond in Standard, it was Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, and it was largely a forgotten set for a lot of players in terms of the power level. And that's not a bad thing. You don't need every set to be this mechanical powerhouse. It's okay for sets to be more quirky and more fun as opposed to being overtly powerful. We play Magic the Gathering to have fun. Winning is the end result of that fun. Anyway, it goes on to say, starting in 2025, new Universes Beyond boosters will be legal in all constructed formats, just like what you would consider normal Magic sets like Bloomburrow. That's 6 new booster sets in 2025, all with identical legality. So this is a major increase in product. Again, we've been getting 4 to 5 sets into Standard every year. Now we are getting 6 sets into Standard. Said, why bring Universes Beyond to all formats? Well, we achieve several goals with this change. New players that come into Magic through Universes Beyond can be properly pathed into smaller formats where their decks have a chance to be competitive. Veteran players should appreciate a reduction in straight to Modern sets that have created a more churn in that format than typical sets do. And our design team gets to do what they're best at. We have decades of reps making sets built for this default use case. We know that Universes Beyond has brought many new players into the game by bringing their favorite stories and characters to life through Magic, while the Commander format does a good job of providing a soft landing spot for those who enjoy social play. Any player who has an itch to try 60-card constructed Magic with their new cards would have to go right to Modern, with over 20 years of card sets, or Legacy, which is even bigger. Standard, and to a slightly lesser degree Pioneer, are much friendlier formats to decks built from mostly a single set, and the new player is both more likely to see other players playing cards of their set and to see other cards and mechanics that could augment their strategy. This I actually agree with wholeheartedly. So there is a lot of players who have come, especially from the Warhammer collaboration, we just get that out of the way, who have come into Magic from Universes Beyond, and the only place for those players to be is Commander. After all Magic has been for the last bit is Commander. And again, if you think I'm wrong, I want you to ask me at what point, how many tournaments, local tournaments of Standard, Modern, and Pioneer do we have to have before it actually is on par with the amount of Commander representation in this format from all players? Yes, your local store may have a thriving modern scene, and if that's the case, I'm so happy for you. But this is not the case everywhere. Hell, I live in the Atlanta region, and there's no such thing as a thriving Modern scene here. There's Super Games, which has sometimes 8, sometimes 10 players for Modern, more if you're lucky, and they have one of the best inventories of the entire Atlanta region. They're located nearer Atlanta than other areas are. They're one of the few places you can go to get these kind of formats. There's another store, Gigabytes, that has 6 to 7 players for Modern sometimes, and then there's local stores to me that don't get Modern tournaments at all, and when we did get them, we had a small set of 3 to 4 players that had to get rotated around each other in order to run anything close to a tournament. This has been the reality for Modern, and there are more players playing Modern in Magic than there are playing Pioneer or Standard. There's only one store I can think of in the Atlanta region that plays Pioneer on Wednesdays, and that's it. Like, that's the format that I want to play more of, but I would love to play Standard as well. But it's just not a thing here. And if the Atlanta region, which is known for being a very competitive region, doesn't have these tournaments and doesn't have this representation, then I'm gonna go ahead and make the assumption that that's indicative of a lot of other areas in the United States. As of right now, when you onboard a new player into Magic, the only real way to do so is to introduce them into Commander, give them a Commander that they really like, and then make them play the absolute most brain-numbingly complicated version of Magic to ever exist. There is no format of Magic that is more complex than Commander, because even with all the same variables as Legacy, there's more decks in this format that people build every single day, and when you sit down to a table, there are more players at the table with more fields, and therefore a more complicated board state, and you have to add in the layer of politics on top of it. Something that competitive 1v1 games like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Weiss do not have. And yet, it is the only way to play Magic for the most part. So how do you get a new player who's coming in from Universes Beyond to play Standard? Well, you have to have the conversation that sits them down and says, hey, you don't get to play with any of the cards you like. You've got to buy a whole bunch of new cards, and even then, you will not have enough to actually build a deck because you need to spend about $1,000 worth of cards to play Standard if you are buying packs. And booster packs are the only way to get cards for Standard outside of buying singles. But if you are a brand new player to a game, and let me reiterate, if you are new to Magic the Gathering, you don't buy singles. Do you know why new players don't buy singles? Because they don't know what singles to buy, because they have to have somebody else to onboard them into that and help them with that. And do you know why they can't have that? Because there aren't other Standard players to help them with that. They don't exist. The only people playing Standard are people who are in very, very lucky regions, or people who play exclusively on Arena. That's it. Those are your Standard players. So if we want to grow what used to be the backbone format of Magic the Gathering, which was Standard, how do you do it? You grab the 15 bajillion new players in Magic, and you give them something that they will enjoy doing. The Universes Beyond stuff may strip Magic of a lot of its identity, but I think most of us don't realize that Magic the Gathering never had that strong of an identity outside of its core fan base to begin with. If I talk about other fan bases, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, somebody can name who Shredder is just by looking at him. If I say Sonic the Hedgehog, somebody can name who Eggman or Shadow the Hedgehog are instantly. If I say Lord of the Rings, they may not know who everyone is, but if you say the name Frodo, they're going to be like, oh yeah, the Hobbit. Magic doesn't have that. People who don't know Magic don't know who Teferi is. They don't know about the stuff he went through. They don't know about Urza and the Bloodlines Project. They don't know about the Brothers' War and Mishra's falling out. They don't know about Ashnod naming Tawnos Duck and going and having a relationship with him. They don't know about all of the different Peruns who've been offed randomly in political scandals in Ravnica, leading to the current guild pack system where Niv Mizzet is the owner of everything. They don't know any of that shit. And they're not gonna know any of that shit because none of it is prolific enough outside of the Magic the Gathering community. And you know why? When you point out to somebody that there's a story for Magic, the first question on their mind isn't, oh my god, where do I read it? It's, that card game has a story? Because Pokemon doesn't have a story in its card game. It has its story elsewhere. Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't have a story in its card game, at least not a very concise or cohesive one. There's a lot of little lore bits that are sprinkled everywhere for different factions in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Universe, but the reality is, until very recently, Yu-Gi-Oh! Hasn't had a story outside of its anime, outside of people playing the card game in a different show, not one that fans of the show really care about outside of that. So where do you go with Magic, which has had its story slowly evaporate in book form over time? You can't really sell somebody on a story of a game like that because it doesn't have the same impact to most audiences. So if you're not onboarding people that way, then you at least can onboard them with Universes Beyond. Yes, it dilutes the Magic IP, but the Magic IP was never the strongest part of it to begin with. It was the mechanical gameplay. It's the thing that people stuck around for, and then the story ended up giving them more reason afterwards.
Continuing on with the article, Aaron says that while Modern Horizons 3 is still fresh in veterans' minds, it's worth stating that our ideal rollout for straight-to-modern content is just Modern Horizons sets, not stuff like Lord of the Rings. As you can see by the format dominance of cards like the One Ring, side by side with a near-complete lack of impact from Assassin's Creed cards, well, from now on, Universes Beyond cards will go through the more typical life cycle of booster sets, with a lot of limited play at release and contributions to each constructed format in ratios appropriate to the size of the format, thus reducing the churn of larger non-rotating formats. Now, there is one thing that's not noted in here, and I need to go ahead and talk about real quick, and that is that the actual motivation for this is money. But it's a twofold thing. You see, the only moneymaker really for Magic the Gathering any longer is Commander. Yes, Modern Horizons sold, but how many people who bought Modern Horizons were doing so to get stuff for their Commander decks? Commander is the cash cow of Magic the Gathering, and we have one of two options. As a community, it's very obvious to see that the options that Wizards of the Coast has is either abandon their other formats effectively, or find ways to revitalize those formats so players are buying into them. After all, the reason for Commander being as popular as it is because we always get new stuff and there's always interesting things on the horizon. However, when you are making a competitive format, that doesn't happen. You don't get that interesting stuff all the time because the interesting stuff from Commander mostly comes from the player base and their brews. There's always something new to see, even if there's not a lot of product to support it. I mean, yes, we get a lot of product, but in the environment where we didn't, Commander would still thrive. Competitive formats don't have the same creative process. Sure, when a set comes out initially, there is a bit of time where everybody is having fun brewing with the new stuff, but after a while, things level out, and then suddenly you have a world where nobody is brewing decks, and everybody is playing whatever the top 2, 3, or 4 decks are for the format. Now, sometimes there's more decks like that. Pioneer actually seems to have a very healthy meta of about 10 or 11 decks right now, but my point is, you need some way for players to feel engaged with the format. And the problem with Standard right now is with so few people playing the format, there's fewer people making new and interesting decks in that format to begin with, unlike Commander. How do you get more people in that format, and how do you provide those people with new and interesting cards without having to constantly power creep things up? Well, you make cards that are interesting, not for the power that they bring to the format, but for what flavor they bring to the game. And that's where Universes Beyond comes in. And when you bring all that into the game, you get newer players coming in who will try their damnedest to play a Final Fantasy deck or a Marvel deck instead of trying to play whatever the strongest thing possible is. And this causes you to have an environment that is not just all spikes playing the best things possible, even though it is a competitive environment. You get your Timmies and your Johnnies, two of the other design ethoses for Magic the Gathering, building their respective decks and causing the format to be more interesting. And that causes people to stick around more because it feels like it isn't stagnating as much. Again, this is something that Magic the Gathering has in Commander. That stagnation isn't anywhere to be found, as there's always new and interesting ways to brew it. But that doesn't exist in Standard. So Wizards seems to be trying to make sure that players have a reason to be around. More players means more variance, and more variance means more players stick around. And more Universes Beyond sets give more anchors for people to play more varied decks, irrespective of their power level, which means more interesting games even in places like Standard. Continuing on with the article, Aaron says, as for the design teams here at Wizards, these are exactly the kinds of products we are staffed to produce well. We get to apply our normal power level heuristics and leverage our future league for constructed testing. The cool part about doing this right after our switch to 3-year Standard is that the format becomes large enough now that players will have a lot of freedom about what cards and styles of decks appeal to them. Again, this speaks to that want to try to have a more diverse format where players have a reason to stick around long term. The initial shock of Universes Beyond is well behind us at this point. I'd like to think that the care we've put into our designing of these sets is evident and that playing with them has proven fun for fans of both Magic and partners alike. For those reasons, I'm pleased to fully treat them as, quote, real Magic sets going forward and letting them be fun for everyone everywhere. This change is purely forward-facing and only worries about projects released in 2025 and later. This change was anticipated and all products were developed with these targets in mind. Although the main content of these booster releases will be legal in all formats, they will contain Commander decks and special guest cards that are not part of the main set and will be legal in places like Commander, Legacy, and Vintage for new Commander and Jumpstart content, as opposed to stuff that is only legal in Standard and therefore legal everywhere else. Now, this part is interesting to me because the previous announcement we had gotten from Wizards of the Coast was that product was being designed not with Standard in mind, because that's not what players wanted at the time. Again, this is one more point in the antitrust stuff. Not antitrust like antitrust laws, but not being able to trust exactly the words coming from Wizards of the Coast employees. However, let me restate again, despite that, this is a good change. We had two worlds ahead of us, effectively. The world where Standard continued to stagnate, and the world where Standard got an injection of new players. Those were the only two options that existed for us. And between Foundations, giving established players a longer running set that'll give them more stuff to play with for longer, and Universes Beyond, giving new players a better entry point for the set, we're only missing one thing to make Standard playable again for newer people. And that's Standard decks. I've been an advocate of this for a while, from basically all aspects of Magic the Gathering, that if you are going to onboard people into the game, the best way to do that is to give them competitively viable decks. Pokemon does this with League Battle decks. Yu-Gi-Oh! Does this with structure decks. You glue 3 Yu-Gi-Oh! Structure decks together, you have something that is halfway competitive. You glue 2 Weiss Trial Deck Pluses together, you have something that plays perfectly well at a tournament. And a Pokemon League Battle deck only needs one supplementary product to be completely sublime, typically, and that's their Trainer's Toolkit. This means that getting into the game for any of these card games, and getting into the game at a 60-card competitive level, only ever requires about a $40 to $50 investment. Magic the Gathering has no such onboarding process outside of Commander. So, while Universes Beyond will give people a signpost to point to for new players, and Foundations will give a broader foundation for established players for Standard, we do still need to have a way to onboard new players. So some kind of actual deck would be helpful. We are 2/3 of the way there right now. Now, let's get the other elephant out of the room for this conversation. I know there's a lot of people who have a lot of strong feelings about this, but I'm going to go ahead and make an anticipation. I'm going to make a prediction. Most of the people complaining about this change weren't playing Standard anyway. And they weren't playing Standard for a variety of reasons, one of which being its poor onboarding process. Hell, they're starting to make Standard starter decks in Magic Arena, but we don't have any in paper, for reasons, I guess. But no, we don't have a good onboarding process for Standard. It's very expensive to keep up with it because it's not an eternal format, and some of people's favorite cards right now are Universes Beyond, and they don't have a place to play them outside of Commander. So if that's all the case, then what reason did you have to play Standard to begin with? Outside of wanting specifically to play 60-card competitive Magic with the, 2 other people at your card shop that were willing to buy into a rotating format, what was your plan to make Standard better? And I'm going to go ahead and think that most people didn't have one. I am not happy with a lot of decisions that Wizards of the Coast makes over the years. I'm not. Especially decisions that feel like they are completely and totally made by Hasbro Corporate, telling Wizards to make a decision that is worse for the players overall, but better for their bottom line. This, however, feels like one of the few times where the Wizards of the Coast bottom line and the actual health of the game that we all play are in sync. The health of the game is better when lower power cards are printed into the game, slowing power creep. Printing Universes Beyond cards into Standard allows them to have a better chance of succeeding while still being lower powered, as they are printed into that set. They don't have to survive in the modern environment. And having more people play Standard means that there are more formats that can thrive besides just Commander. If the only format that's thriving is Commander, eventually the only reason to design a set is to make stuff for Commander. And if that's the case, then the game that we actually really love truly dies, because a game dies when it has no players. And if the only thing we're playing is Commander, then all of Magic has died except Commander. It's the Phoenix that took everything else's place. We are at a very strange crossroads for Magic, where it needs to evolve to survive. And this current cross-collaboration model that everybody is doing right now, as much as I don't like it, it is the model that is working. It is the model that onboards people into games. I know people that didn't play Fortnite until Doctor Doom and Spider-Man became part of them. I didn't play Fortnite until those friends got me into playing the game. And I know people that didn't play Magic until Warhammer brought them in to the game. There's no reason to think that that same system isn't going to incentivize players to play Standard, as it already incentivizes them to play Commander. At least that's my thoughts. I overall think this is a decision that the knee-jerk reaction to is bad, but the actual material benefit is quite good for players. At least that's my thought. But I took a few days to talk about this because my initial thought when this happened was, oh my god, I have to make a video, this makes me so angry. And then I took 2 or 3 days to realize it kind of fixes all of my problems with Standard. Standard now lasts longer, so the financial hit is far less poignant when you're trying to play a particular set in Standard. The Foundation set allows us to have a floor to actually play from that lasts longer than everything else. And Universes Beyond might finally bring new players into Standard to enjoy the game the way that I started enjoying it when I was a kid. This does everything I want. This is something I want to be mad about, but it's something that makes me happy. And overall, I think it's good for the health of the game. That said, I do want to know your thoughts. I want to know where you're coming from. I want to know your positions. Do you like this change to Universes Beyond stuff? Do you think this is a good thing going forward for Magic players? And if you do, let me know down there in the comment section. And if you don't, I want to hear your thoughts. I know there's a lot of differing opinions on this, and I want to get a good sampling of the Magic community's thoughts on Universes Beyond going forward. So let me know down there. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravelern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fire Shard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.